get started. So now it is recording. I just want to say a big thank you to begin with for Laura Thorpe for coming and actually, doing this event again with us last year. SCOM and LISSA hosted it last year and it was amazing. And as someone that is now currently in the process of graduating, I was very happy to be a part of this in the spring because I answered a lot of questions and learned a lot of things that I didn't even know that I probably was already, might have been confused on. So I'm pretty sure everyone knows who the amazing, wonderful Laura Thorpe is. And I can say as a personal note, she is the primary reason why my graduate school experience here at the University of South Carolina has been such a fun one. I feel like I've always reached out to Laura Thorpe for anything. But I will hand it over to Laura Thorpe to begin the portfolio workshop.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay, beautiful. So I just want to give kind of a quick overview of what I'm going to go through. I will ask Laura Carter, if I think you're technically the host of this session, if you could make me the host so that I get the screen sharing stuff. So essentially what I'm going to do is this is going to be more of an informational kind of overview. Each semester we started doing more detailed workshops for folks who are graduating in that term. So for folks who are graduating this semester, fall 2021, we are going to have a more detailed workshop that's going to last about 2 hours on October 16th, just for folks who are graduating in the fall. So the goal of this informational session is really to hopefully put your minds at ease, relieve any stress that you may have, just kind of thinking about the portfolio. I will say that I find that students, even in their very first semester, tend to kind of build it up in their heads and be really concerned about it. And the good news, hopefully, that you will take away from this tonight is that you are really doing the bulk of the work for the portfolio as you move through the program. So when it comes time to actually create and submit it, you're not having to come up with a bunch of brand new material, a bunch of brand new content that you then have to submit. So I am going to share some resources, some sample portfolios, and just talk through the basics of what to expect. Let's see. Someone has already asked a question. Yes, October 16th is a Saturday. We have chosen to host that more detailed workshop for fall 2021 graduates on a Saturday because usually when we host it during the week, most folks can't attend. I will be sending out separate emails with information about the date and time, separate from this session. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I will say that if you put questions in the chat while I'm screen sharing, I can't really see them very well. So don't worry if I don't respond to it immediately. I'm going to make sure that we have time for Q&A after I kind of go through this first part. Okay, let me get that out of the way. So I'm going to share some really useful resources that you guys will actually have access to, already have access to on our internal MyCIC website. If you've never looked through this website, I really encourage you to do so. There's a lot of really helpful information here just in general, but this is really where you're going to find a lot of the useful portfolio information in particular. And so I'm going to go through a couple of pages. I will share the links in the chat before we get out of here tonight so that you can have those and bookmark them if you want to. Once I go through the overview, I'm going to talk about both general track and school library track. And then I'm going to show a couple of examples of each from previous graduates who have already done the portfolio and moved on and graduated from the program. So I'm going to focus first on the general track portfolio. Really, the entire point of this portfolio is related to kind of three major goals. The first is that it is very much related to our accreditation as a program with ALA. We essentially have to provide data and proof to the American Library Association that we should remain accredited with them because we are educating our graduates to meet a certain set of competencies that they lay out. And essentially, these competencies guarantee that any MLIS program that is ALA accredited guarantees that any graduate from that accredited program will be competent in these specific areas. So I'm going to go through those competencies really quickly. because you're going to want to be familiar with them. And this page that I'm sharing right now is super duper helpful. So as you'll see, it goes through all 6 core competencies. It provides a description in general of what the competency is, and then it provides specific learning outcomes associated with the core competency. It then also provides a list of possible SLIS courses that could be relevant to this particular competency area. I will say here up front, these lists are not exhaustive. They are not all inclusive. So you may look at this and say, oh, information in its organization, I have an assignment from 706 that would be perfect for this, but I don't see it listed here. Just because it's not listed doesn't mean you can't use it. So let me back up really quickly for 1 second to actually hop to another page that actually goes through the overview of what you're putting into your portfolio. What do you actually have to include? So I'll go back to the core competency areas in a moment, but these are the 6 overall titles of the areas. So information and its organization, provision of information services, leadership and management, research, technology, and professional development and lifelong learning. Now, for anyone who has paid attention to the core curriculum revision that we just put into place last year, you're probably looking at those 6 core courses and saying, oh, these really line up with those 6 core courses. And that is definitely part of that curriculum revision that we went through. But I do want to emphasize that when you're building your portfolio, you are not limited to pulling assignments just from core courses. You can pull from core or elective courses. Any of your SLIS courses are fair game. Essentially what you are doing in this portfolio, which is completely electronic, you do not have to turn in anything that is a hard copy. You are selecting one assignment from one course for each of the 6 core competency areas. So that'll be a total of 6 assignments altogether. You will need to select a different assignment from a different course for each area. And so what I mean by that is that you cannot use the same assignment for more than one core competency area. And you actually cannot use different assignments from the same course for more than one core competency area. For example, and we really see this a little bit more with information and its organization and provision of information services. You could conceivably have assignments, different assignments from say 703 or 706 that would meet these areas, but you would have to say use 706 for information and its organization and 703 for provision of information services, rather than using either 703 for both or 706 for both. And that's just an example. That is not me saying that you have to use either of those courses for those particular competency areas. And so I'll go to the overall view of the portfolio content. So you're going to include a welcome or introduction page that really just welcomes your visitors to your end of program portfolio. It's going to give them an overview of the content that is included in the portfolio, and it's going to explain to them how to navigate the portfolio. You should include a photograph on your introduction page. It says here it should be a headshot or a photograph taken in a professional setting. Let me clarify. You do not need to go out and pay for professional headshots just for your end of program portfolio. We have had people use a variety of different pictures, ones taken by family. Some do have professional headshots that have already been taken. Some have selfies that actually look fairly professional. Essentially, as long as the picture itself is professional looking, it does not have to be professionally taken. So basically just don't include like a wedding photo or a picture of you out partying on the weekends and you will be fine. The next component that you should include is your resume. And so, sorry, is someone talking? Okay. So the next component is the resume. And we're going to do likely what we did last spring. We had a resume workshop that we partnered with the Career Center to do. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to do that again this coming spring 2022. But I can also make sure that the link to that previous session that we did record is made available to folks if you'd like to reference it for working on your resume. After your resume is when you will provide all of your work samples. Now, keep in mind that the point of the work samples that you are providing is you're seeking to demonstrate your mastery of the core competency areas and their associated learning outcomes. So when it comes to selecting the assignments that you want to use for this part of your portfolio, that is really what should be at the forefront of your mind. Does this clearly show that I have mastered this competency area? If so, how does it do that? And answering that how is really going to come from looking at those specific learning outcomes and saying, okay, it clearly demonstrates these 3 learning outcomes because I did X, Y, and Z. It also should be an example of your best work. So if you submitted an assignment and got feedback from a professor on how to improve it, you can absolutely make those revisions and submit that revised version of the assignment. If you do that, you're going to make sure you want to reference it in your reflective essay, which leads me to the next part. With all 6 of your assignments, your work samples, those terms are interchangeable, you're going to include a reflective essay. The work sample should be linked on the same page where you provide your reflective essay. So these 2 components should be on the same page together. And so what you're going to provide in your reflective essay is a description of the assignment that you're providing. So what were you asked to do? What was the goal of the assignment? What were the parameters of the assignment? Usually we ask that students provide a description and then the link, but these 2 parts you can actually change the order if you want to. If it makes more sense for you to provide the link and then a description, that is absolutely fine. Just make sure you have a description that is clear and describes the assignment in its entirety, and a link that works. You then will want to provide analysis and reflection. And this can often be kind of the more difficult part of the reflective essay. So I'm actually going to scroll down because there is some description of these 2 parts on this particular page. So the analysis portion is really asking you to look at what you've done and evaluate it. So you're going to talk about the successes and failures of this particular assignment. What did you do really well? What could you potentially improve upon? And so circling back to what I said a minute ago, if you submit an assignment where you got feedback from an instructor, you can absolutely use that feedback in writing your reflective essay. For example, you could say, I did X, Y, and Z really well, but my instructor indicated that I could have done A, B, C better. This is how I would do that better. That's a great example of analysis. So you're going to want to talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, and essentially what you learned from the experience. For the analysis portion of your reflective essay, you're going to want to answer the question, what happened when you completed this assignment and why? Then when you get into the reflection, you're kind of looking back at what you've said in your analysis portion and looking forward to how it will influence your professional growth and knowledge building. So this is your opportunity to essentially say, okay, here's what worked and what didn't work. This is what I would do differently in a professional setting, in a real life setting in the future. This is what I would keep the same because I know that it worked really well. This is how I can essentially use this moving forward in my professional life. And so I don't want the word essay to freak people out. These essays really should not be super duper long. It's basically about 1 page, 500, maybe 750 words altogether per reflective essay. So you are not writing multiple pages and pages and pages for just one work sample over and over again. These reflective essays really do not have to be super duper long as you are making sure that you are addressing all parts that must be there. So the description, the analysis, and the reflection. The last component of your portfolio is going to be your vision statement. This is something that usually students do some version of in 701. It tends to be one of the final assignments from 701. It could be, sometimes it's called your professional philosophy statement. It can be referred to as different things. I do want to clarify here because this is a question that comes up every single semester. If you do use your vision statement from 701, That is not the same as using an assignment for 701 for one of the competency areas. So it's not going to knock it out of the running. And I say that because often students find work samples from 701 that are relevant to the professional development and lifelong learning competency area or the leadership and management competency area. So the vision statement does not count as a work sample. So if you do use that from 701, 701 is still in the running for the actual competency areas. Basically, what you want your vision statement to be is a discussion of your professional philosophy and beliefs, your values and ethics that will guide your professional behavior and practice as an information specialist. Essentially, you're going to be looking back on the work you've done, the work you've provided in this portfolio, what you've learned from it, and clearly stating how that has shaped your professional practices. And how you plan to continue growing from that, implementing that in the workplace, and so on and so forth. As you'll see, one of the last questions that you do want to address in your vision statement is how you intend to continue growing as a professional over the next 5 years. So this vision statement is essentially saying, this is where I've been, this is what I've learned, this is how I've already grown as a professional, this is how I intend to move forward as a professional, this is how I intend to continue growing as a professional. So if you've already written a version of this, you don't have to use it exactly as you did it in 701. You are welcome to revise it. You're also welcome to start from scratch. If you're like, I feel completely differently now than I did in my very first semester with 701, you are welcome to start completely from scratch, significantly revise, whatever feels more accurate for you and more representative of your actual professional beliefs. So let me go back a page and kind of talk a little bit more about those core competencies and your actual work samples. So selecting the work samples can kind of feel like the hardest part of the portfolio, even though you're not actually creating brand new content for the portfolio. The work samples for each core competency should already be assignments that you have already completed. You shouldn't use assignments that are in progress. You shouldn't use assignments that you haven't yet gotten a greater feedback on. So even if you want to use a class that you are currently in your last semester, as long as the assignment you use has already been submitted and you've gotten a grade and feedback for it, that should be fine. So I'll scroll through these really quickly. I mentioned the learning outcomes a few times already. I'll point to them again to say that when you're writing your reflective essays, you should really reference at least a couple of specific learning outcomes when you're talking about your description and your analysis. So you're going to want to essentially say, I've selected this work sample from this course to demonstrate my mastery of, or my competency in information and its organization, because this work sample demonstrates that I can explain major concepts, theories, etc., and that I can explain information-seeking behavior in theoretical and practical terms. It demonstrates these learning outcomes because I did X, Y, and Z. That's just a basic overview of how you can approach the description at the beginning of your reflective essays, but you're going to want to make sure you address specific learning outcomes for all 6 core competency areas. And so that kind of takes me back to where I started with what is the point of the portfolio overall. So we've gone through what you actually do in building the portfolio. I'm going to jump back to why we have you do this in the first place. So yes, it is a big part of accreditation, and essentially proving that you have gained the knowledge that we guarantee that we're going to make sure you have when you graduate from this accredited program. It's also your way of demonstrating what you have learned and what you've gained and the work that you've produced. And so it's very much a cumulative and summative project in that sense. And so I find that students actually can enjoy the portfolio process because you're looking back and saying, holy crap, look at all that I've accomplished in the past few years or so. The other point of it too is that this should absolutely be something that you can use in your professional life post-graduation. We want you to be able to use this portfolio to share with employers or potential employers to say that this is what I've done. This is what I can do for you. Here's all of the things that I already know how to do. I have actual experience in them. And so your portfolio is very much supposed to be a professional tool that you can use once you hit the job market. And so just really quickly going through the rest of the core competency areas, as you will see, there are learning outcomes and potential recommended courses for every single one. Again, you are not limited to using just these courses that are provided for each competency area, and you can use ones that are not listed here, as long as the work sample you choose for each area is clearly relevant and clearly demonstrates how you've mastered at least a few of these learning outcomes. If you can explain it in your reflective essay, then you should be good to go. If you find yourself struggling to explain why you've chosen a certain work sample for a certain competency area, that may be an indicator that it's maybe not the best one for that particular area. All right, and so again, I'm going to share these links in the chat before we get out of here, but now I'm going to talk about the actual process of building a portfolio and what that actually looks like. So we have this nifty little PDF that you can look at. This is set up for portfolios that are being built in Blackboard. And so I do want to quickly clarify, regardless of which track you're on, whether it's general track or school library track, you have a choice of what platform you use to build your portfolio. You can build it in Blackboard, and I'll show you how to navigate to that in a moment. Or you can build it using a content management system like WordPress, Wix, Weebly, Google Sites. Those four tend to be the most common and most popular ones. I will say that the choice in platforms, they each come with pros and cons. The benefit of Blackboard is that we have templates already put in there, a template for general track and a template for school library track that you essentially plug your information into, and you don't have to do a lot of groundwork in building. On the other hand, if you use an outside platform like WordPress, Wix, Weebly, you have a lot more control over what the aesthetics of it are, the layout, the navigation, everything like that. So while you're kind of building it more from the ground up, you have a lot more flexibility and a lot more control over what the end product actually looks like. The other benefit of building it outside of Blackboard is that it can be easier to share with future employers, because at some point post-graduation, I think it's at least a year or so, you'll lose access to Blackboard, and it can be hard to share those links with people outside of the university. So just mentioning that so you can think about it, let it percolate while you're thinking about your portfolio. And so this document that I have pulled up here essentially goes through all of the information that I've just spoken about, but it has it put into kind of the layout that it should look like when you actually build your portfolio. And again, this is based on the Blackboard layout. So again, you have everything in the order that it should be in, and then a description of what it should look like. And so I'll just scroll through this really quickly. And I will say that you really should follow the order listed here for the competency areas. They are set up in this order for a particular reason, and so we just recommend that you do follow that particular order. And so I will jump back and quickly talk about the school library portfolio guidelines. So the school library portfolio is really fundamentally the same as the general track portfolio. It is also part of accreditation for our school library certification program, both at the state and national levels. It is required for people who are graduating and being certified as school librarians, and it includes really the same number of components as the general track portfolio. There are just one or two differences because the school library portfolio focuses on adept learning outcomes rather than ALA core competencies. So as you'll see, very similar here at the beginning, you should also have a welcome or introduction page that includes a portfolio. The content of this is exactly the same as it is for general track. an introduction to what you're going to be talking about in the portfolio and how to navigate it. Again, you should also have your resume. That's required regardless of which track you're on. And you should have a vision statement. That's required for both tracks. Here is one of the slight differences for the school library track is you should have a professional development plan. And the difference with this is for the general track, it's kind of included in the vision statement, but for the school library track, you should have a separate professional development plan that you come up with. It is mentioned as an assignment from 701. I think it's actually more of an assignment that tends to come out of 720 or 794. But again, this is also something that you can start from scratch and write as you are building the portfolio. And then again, we have essentially all of the exact same information as I just shared for the general track. You have learning outcomes. You have to demonstrate your mastery and competency in those learning outcomes. You are doing that by selecting a work sample for each outcome and providing a reflective essay to go along with each work sample. Again, you have to have description, analysis, and reflection, and then a link directly to your provided work sample. And then down here, you're given specific information about each learning outcome that you have to provide a work sample for. And the difference with the school library track portfolio, because you have to meet certain certification requirements, there are actually specific work samples that you have to include for certain areas. And so you'll see for learning outcome 1, the community and school analysis assignment from 720 is what you have to provide there. And so for learning outcome 2, you actually have choices, but you have a description of what you might want to choose there. And so it is very similar to the page I was showing you for the ALA core competency areas, where we list what the learning outcomes are and then suggested courses you can draw from. And so I think really learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 4 and learning outcome 3 are the primary ones where you have specific assignments that you have to use as your work sample, but you still have to come up with and write your reflective essay for every single work sample. And again, this shows you the order that everything should go in. So you have all of your introductory materials and then your work samples and essays for all 5 of your learning outcomes for the school library track. Okay, so now I am actually going to show you some sample portfolios of students who have done very, very well on the portfolio in the past. And this is one, Liana Bain. She graduated in fall of 2019. And she built hers using Weebly. And so here is how she organized it. She has essentially 2 menu options up here. And so she has her introduction, which includes a professional picture of her and a very detailed introduction to her portfolio. I will say this is an exceptionally detailed introduction, which is great, but you don't have to necessarily be quite as detailed as this, though you are absolutely welcome to if you want. And then she has her CV, and there's actually a link to download it directly. You can do that, or you can even paste it right here onto the page if you would prefer that. And then she has her vision statement, which again has been entered directly onto the page. And then she has all of her work samples. And she has them organized in the order that the core competency areas are provided. And she actually included the description and the learning outcomes for each of the core competency areas. You are not required to do that, but you can. And then we have the link to download her work sample. And then we have her reflective essay. As you can see, it's 3 fairly short paragraphs. I would say this is probably no more than 400 to 500 words. And this is exactly what you have to do. It's exactly what we are expecting. And so I will go to an example of a general track portfolio that was built using Blackboard. This is Morgan Lundy, and she graduated this past spring, I believe. And so what you'll see here is the PDF that I had pulled up a minute ago showing the basic outline for the general track it really matches this and is modeled on that. So the very first page that you'll come to is the introduction page, and then her CV, which is provided in detail right here rather than being linked. And then you can just pick a random area to go to. Here's the direct link to her work sample. She provided some artwork. You're not required to do that, but you absolutely can. And then she has her description, analysis, and reflection. She actually labeled each section of her reflective essay. That's not a requirement, but if it makes more sense to you and it helps you kind of keep track of what you're doing, it can be a really great way to kind of work through your essays piece by piece. And then she has her vision statement down here at the end. And so the last couple that I will show you are school library portfolios. So this is Danelle Thompson, and she is, I also believe, a spring 2020 graduate, I think. So she has her intro, her resume, and she actually chose to do links instead of putting the text onto the Blackboard page, which you are welcome to do too. She provided the text for her professional development plan, and this is a great example of essentially what you're doing for the professional development plan. 3 basic parts that are actually described on the page that I was just showing you. And then each learning outcome on a separate page, link, description, analysis, and reflection. And one last sample. Suzanne Brooks, hers is again essentially the same. We have her intro with a professional headshot. She actually chose to have her navigation on the right-hand side. You can do that as well. The main thing to keep in mind when it comes to setting up the navigation for your portfolio is that it should be easy to navigate. Whoever your portfolio reviewer is should have no trouble understanding how to navigate your portfolio and find all of the required component parts. So a good way to test it out is to maybe find somebody who's not super tech savvy in your life, share your portfolio with them. If they have no trouble navigating it, you're golden. The last thing that I will say, and I'll actually go ahead and stop sharing my screen, is I'll talk really quickly about how the actual review process goes. So for general track students, you'll be assigned an individual portfolio reviewer who's a current faculty member in the school. The way that works is at the beginning of each semester, you probably saw it earlier on this semester, I'll send out an email with graduation reminders and saying, if you're graduating this semester, make sure you apply by whatever the deadline is for that term. After the graduation application deadline, I actually pull the list of everybody who applied, and that's what I use to make portfolio reviewer assignments. I take care of assigning a reviewer. You do not have to go out and find them. I just randomly assign folks to make it as fair as possible. And I send individual emails to each student. I connect them with their reviewer, and I provide detailed instructions for how to submit their portfolio and the deadline for that. For school library track students, whoever is teaching your section of 794, so your internship in the semester when you graduate, that is the person who will review your portfolio. And I send out a separate email for school library track students with that information as well. All right, I think that is the end of the portion that I had prepared to go through. I am now happy to answer any and all questions that you may have. And if you want, you can turn on your microphone and shout them out or put them in the chat, whatever it feels best for you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So with us knowing that this portfolio is going to be something that's big, it's something that we're going to be doing at the end of our time here, should we make it a point to look at the portfolio guidelines as we write some of our papers and maybe try to pre-plan what we're going to be putting in our portfolio to meet the competencies?
That's a very good question. So I will say, I'm trying to answer this in a diplomatic way. If you want to do that, you absolutely can. And I definitely think it could be a benefit. It can make life potentially easier for you when it does come time to do your portfolio, with the caveat that when you are completing your assignments and writing your papers, trying to tailor them towards those portfolio requirements may just be an added layer of stress in some instances. So if you feel that happening, then definitely don't worry about that and prioritize what your instructor is requiring of you. I definitely highly, highly, highly recommend, and you definitely heard us say this in orientation for the past several semesters, the best thing you can do to prepare for your portfolio as you're moving through the program is saving all of your work and all of your assignments somewhere that is easily accessible. So a folder on your desktop, a USB, make sure you have a backup, but save it somewhere outside of Blackboard, because you can't guarantee that you'll be able to access everything in Blackboard. It just needs to be easily accessible so that you don't have to go hunting it down when it is time for you to build your portfolio. And then let's see, we've gotten a couple of questions. So Sarah has asked, for the resume, is it more of a 2-page resume or CV? That's a really good question, and that may be a bit more of a case-by-case basis. We do not say in the requirements for the portfolio that it has to be a resume or it has to be a CV. We leave that determination up to you and your professional goals. So if you are going into more of a professional field like public librarianship, or even if you don't necessarily have a ton of professional work experience, then it may be on the shorter side. It may be more similar to a 2-page resume. On the other hand, if you see yourself going into more of the academic side of things, so academic libraries specifically, or even potentially pursuing more education down the road, then it may look more like a CV, which is usually much longer than a resume. So that determination is actually very much up to you. But as long as you have either a CV or a resume that you include in your portfolio, it is inclusive of all of your professional experience. And that can include volunteering, internships, full-time and part-time employment, student employment. So if you're a graduate assistant, you can list that as part of your experience. I think I already mentioned volunteer, but working with organizations like LISSA and SCALM, any conferences that you've done, that can all be included on your resume. Okay, and let's see. Oh, I'm going to jump down to Deanna's question. Can I clarify what a CV is and what it stands for? So a CV, it stands for curriculum vitae, which is basically Latin for a listing of all of the academic and professional things that you've accomplished throughout your career. It's used much more frequently in academia than anywhere else. So usually, like professors and instructors in institutions of higher education are the ones who primarily use CVs. And that's because for those kinds of positions, you are required to list not only professional experience, but research experience, publications, conference presentations, and things like that. Which is why I say choosing between a resume and CV is definitely going to come down to your professional goals. 9 times out of 10, the resume is more appropriate. But if you have a lot of experience and it ends up becoming a very, very long resume, then framing it as a CV may be more helpful. Okay, let me hop back to Erin's question. Setting up a time to go over what documents you can use for the different competencies of the portfolio. Yeah, you can send me an email and I can send you my Calendly link so that you can make an appointment with me, and I'll be happy to go over that stuff with you guys. I will also say, I kind of felt like when I was describing it that it may feel kind of stressful trying to pick your work samples or assignments. Usually the issue that students run into, and I think they fear that it's going to be a situation where they don't have enough assignments or they're struggling to find work samples. Usually it's the opposite, where they have more than one work sample that could potentially work for the same competency area, and they struggle to decide which one to use. And so my primary recommendation, just in general, for choosing work samples is it your best work? Does it clearly demonstrate your mastery of that particular competency area? And can you clearly identify at least 2 learning outcomes that are clearly demonstrated by that work sample? If you can answer yes to all 3 of those questions, then that work sample should be good to go. I also want to talk quickly while we have a minute about the scoring process, because that can also be a really big source of stress for folks. So the way it works is you have a submission deadline each semester, November 15th for fall semester, April 15th for spring and summer. A quick note there, summer graduates actually turn their portfolios in with spring graduates, and that's because most faculty don't really work or aren't available over the summer term. So summer graduates have to go ahead and get their portfolio done. Once you submit it, I tend to give faculty no more than 2 to 3 weeks to get their scores done and returned to me. They have a rubric that they use, and I'm happy to provide a link to that rubric so that folks can see it and kind of get an idea of what it looks like. You have to make a minimum score that I believe is 60 out of a possible 100 points. So it is essentially kind of a pass-fail grading. And as long as you pass it, you're fine, you're good to go. We'll clear you for graduation. We have had instances in the past where students initially get a score back that is not passing. When that happens, we always send the feedback to students, ask them to revise it based on the feedback, and resubmit for a higher score. So we have actually never had anybody fail and not graduate. We always give students the opportunity to revise and resubmit, because we don't want this one thing to prevent people from graduating. And we also want the final product to be something that everybody can actually use post-graduation. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, what other questions do folks have? While we wait on that, I can actually start putting some links in the chat from the information that I was looking at previously.
And I would just like to double check that our portfolio we can also add to our LinkedIn, and that's something that we can have put up before it gets checked for graduation. Can we just put it up immediately, or should it be something after it gets reviewed?
That'll definitely be 100% up to you and what you feel comfortable with. We don't have a rule or a designation about that. If you get feedback and you decide you want to change some stuff around, then you're welcome to do that and then kind of repost the link. But if you have it done and want to go ahead and attach it to your LinkedIn profile, especially if you're using it for job applications, then you're welcome to go ahead and do that. We're not so controlling that we try to control that aspect of it, essentially. Let's see. Okay, Erin has asked, how old/recent do the headshots need to be? Not so old that people wouldn't recognize that it's you in the photo, but it doesn't have to be like from the last, I don't know, 6 months or a year. We don't put that kind of designation on the headshot requirement. Just so long as it's recognizably you and professional, that's really all you kind of need to worry about with the headshot. Again, I don't want that to be a major source of concern for folks, because I promise it's not the most important part. Okay, school library link, okay. All right.
If we used if we created a website for an assignment for a course such as like academic libraries, could we be able to utilize that as a work sample for one of the assignments?
Yes, absolutely. And so in that instance, when you're providing the work sample, you would just link directly to the website within whatever platform you're using for your portfolio. Okay, so really quick, Michelle, the link that you're clicking actually says MLIS competencies. The one that I just posted that says School Library Certification Portfolio Guidelines, that's the link. It's just above your comment to me. So that's the link for School Library Certification. I will also say though, from the MLIS competencies page, if you just click on School Library Certification, you will then be able to get to the portfolio guidelines specifically for school library students. All right. What other questions do folks have? If not questions, then there aspects of the portfolio that you feel like are really causing stress for you right now, or just something that you're super duper worried about? Okay, so yeah, Erin makes a good point. She says that she feels like for her, the most stressful part is going to be gathering all of the documents. I think, yeah, that's absolutely fair. And that tends to be what I hear from students a lot, which is why I do, again, highly recommend keeping them in a central single location, maybe on a USB in a specific folder with a subfolder for each course. That way, you know kind of where to go. And you can always choose an organizational style that works best and makes sense for you. But if you can kind of get everything in one single location and then go through and choose your documents, I feel like that'll probably reduce some of that stress. I'll also say when it comes time to actually do the portfolio and get it over with, starting as soon as you can in your final semester will probably help relieve that stress too. I've found the students who wait until like the last 2 weeks before the deadline, so like the first 2 weeks of November or the first 2 weeks of April, tend to experience more stress with the process than those who start even a week or two before that. Yeah, people will wait that late. Life happens, and also sometimes people feel like they work better under significant pressure and produce better work that way. But yeah, if at all possible, try not to wait that late. Just speaking from personal experience, the sooner you can start, the better you'll feel. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So for folks who are actually graduating this semester and you're finishing up classes and doing the portfolio, a lot of times if you can kind of go ahead and get a basic layout of the portfolio done, even if you change out a couple of the components, that can make life a lot easier. Especially if you're also trying to get major final assignments done and the portfolio at the same time. Let's see, Deanna. Oh, you're very welcome for the overview. And yes, and so I will say for the more detailed workshops for people who are graduating, I plan to keep doing those every single semester. So again, we have one for the fall graduates. We're going to have one for the spring and summer 2022 graduates next semester. And so those, again, last much longer than this. But I tend to do those for people graduating in that term, just because we get into the weeds of the portfolio a bit more. And it can honestly be kind of an overwhelming amount of information for people who are earlier on in the program and don't have to worry about those details as much right now. All right. Okay, let's see. So Caroline has asked, do we recommend gathering the work samples first and then choosing a website, or deciding on the website first? Oh, that feels like a stressful part for you. So what I would actually recommend, Caroline, and you know what, let me share my screen again because I forgot to do something. Picking the platform, especially if that feels like a super stressful aspect of this for you, may be the best thing to do first. And if you feel like you just really don't want to use Blackboard, that is perfectly fine. What I would recommend in that case is kind of tinkering and playing around with the other platforms first to see if there's one that feels more natural or intuitive to you. So Weebly may feel really nice and straightforward to you. I've heard really good things about Wix and Google Sites, that they're very user-friendly. I will say in my experience, WordPress tends to be slightly more complex than the others. And if you've not built a site in WordPress before, it can be a little more difficult to get things formatted the way you want. You do in some cases have to have a small understanding of HTML and a little bit of coding, but not necessarily. So what I will quickly show you in Blackboard, if you want to use Blackboard, again, it has the templates already set up for you, which can make life a lot easier because you kind of just plug it in and go. So if you log in, you're going to want to come down here and click on Tools, and then you'll click on Portfolios. And so I've created several sample portfolios, but I'll show you how to actually find the templates. So you'll come here to Create Portfolio and give it a title, and then click on Select Portfolio Template. And if you scroll down, you will see two choices. So SLIS non-school library media portfolio template, and then SLIS school library media. That's what SLM stands for, portfolio template. So let's say this is a general track portfolio. So we're going to do non-SLM. Click Submit. You can put a description in here if you want to, but then you'll click Submit. You can do a tour if you want. But as you'll see, you have every single required page that you need already over here, and you can change the order if you want to. So I want my resume before my vision statement, and I want information, organization, and its access to be first. So I'll move it up here. And then you can go to each one and edit it so that all of your information is in there the way that it should be. And there are actually instructions provided with each part of the template. One last thing that I will also show that is really, really useful if you are using Blackboard is this link right here. And I'll put this in the chat, step-by-step instructions for creating the portfolio in Blackboard. This is actually useful regardless of which template you're using, because the instructions are the same no matter what. When you create your portfolio, you will actually have to go through and organize things a bit so that it turns out correctly and displays correctly for your reviewer. This document explains how to do every single part of that step by step in detail. And so again, you can use this whether you're school library track or general track. But this is only relevant if you are using Blackboard to build your portfolio. Okay, let's see, pasting that link right there. And yeah, Michelle, I agree with you. In my experience, Google Sites seems to be very user-friendly. It's one that a lot of our school librarians and teachers tend to use. And I think because a lot of school districts and teachers are encouraged to use Google Sites already in their own professional work. But I also think that it's far more user-friendly and kind of more straightforward, and still gives you a lot of control over the aesthetics of your portfolio.
I have a question.
Yes,
Do you
sir.
recommend a blend of written documents and maybe video essays like we are allowed to use in class? Because I know personally, I record a lot of video responses or video submissions for discussion boards or for long form essay assignments where we're given the choice between maybe writing that 1,500 word document and recording a 10-minute video.
So I would say you can absolutely use a mixture. For the work samples, you're likely going to want to focus a bit more on larger projects than you are on like discussion boards or shorter essay assignments potentially. So if you had to create a LibGuide, for example, that could be a really great sample that you could use for provision of information services. If you had to do a presentation of some kind, you can use that. I think there was one sample, the Morgan Lundy sample. She had something that was a video. Yes, so for provision of information services, she had an information literacy tutorial video that she did. So you can absolutely use videos that you have created as assignments for your classes. But those larger projects are likely going to be more useful and beneficial as work samples than say something like a discussion board. The other thing I'll mention too, because this tends to come up, there's a lot of group work throughout your courses in this program. You can use group assignments or projects that were done as part of a group work setup, as long as you clearly state and indicate what you contributed to the assignment, what you were responsible for, and focus your analysis and reflection primarily on that part of the assignment. Okay, let's see. Caroline has asked a question. Can people outside of USC view the Blackboard portfolio link if you want to use it for job applications? I believe yes, and let me show you how to do that actually. So let me see if I can get back. All right, so if you go to your portfolio and click on More, and then go to Share, you will select Share a Snapshot with, and then if they are not part of U of SC in any way, you will click on External Users, and then you will enter their complete email address. So I'll do like my personal Gmail address, and that is how you will be able to share it. You can include a password to access it if you want to. You can include an expiration date if you only want them to have access for a certain amount of time. But then you click Submit, and you should get this kind of pinkish purple message at the top that says the title of your portfolio has been shared, and you'll also see down here who it was shared with and an external link for accessing it. And again, this works as long as you still have access to Blackboard, which you should maintain access for at least a year after you graduate, though that information from the university is slightly unclear. Okay. Oh, good question from Aaron. Can multiple group project members use the same project? If one of your partners is also graduating, can you both use the same presentation in your portfolio? Yes. So one group project member does not have kind of ownership over a group project presentation. Again, that's why we emphasize that if you're using a presentation that was done as a group presentation, you clearly identify what you are responsible for and what specifically you contributed to that group presentation, and focus your reflection and analysis on that. As long as you are clear, you state up front, this was a group project, this is what I contributed and what I was responsible for, here's what worked within what I was responsible for, here's what I learned from that in particular. You can also mention, what you learned as part of working as a group, because that's definitely something that comes up in professional life. As long as you clearly indicate that it was a group project and then indicate what you did as part of the group project, that should not be a problem whatsoever. It will not be a situation where someone looks at this and says, oh, this is plagiarism, which I feel like is maybe the underlying concern with that question. Again, as long as you're clearly recognizing and acknowledging to your reviewer that it was a group project, you have nothing to worry about. All right. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, let's see, Sarah. Okay, if you've had a definite change in your vision statement from your original philosophy, should you mention that in your new statement? I think you definitely can. In fact, I think that would be very appropriate to kind of acknowledge, I wrote an initial draft of this vision statement as part of 701 when I first started the program. My vision has shifted. This is why, and this is how. I think you could absolutely even ground your new vision statement in that sense if you wanted to. You're not required to acknowledge that it's significantly changed from one that you've already written. The likelihood of, say, your portfolio reviewer being the same person who you had for 701 who graded that vision statement is highly unlikely. And even if that did happen, they are not going to be grading or scoring that vision statement based on what you turned in 701. So that component is not being compared to an earlier version of the vision statement or anything like that. So I would say you're definitely welcome to mention that change in your vision statement if you want, but you're not required to do it. Oh, let's see. I had another question come in about the same time as that one. Once you lose access to Blackboard, do you lose access to the portfolio link if it was built through Blackboard? I think yes. Unfortunately, if you share it with an external user, that external link should still work both for you and that external user. What you may want to do a little while after graduation, if you kind of just want to use the Blackboard template so that you can get it built in a less stressful way, and then take your time and kind of transfer it to a different platform outside of Blackboard. I've seen students do that fairly frequently, especially if you're concerned about losing access in Blackboard, and ease of access for people who are outside the university. Okay, let's see. One more question. Would I recommend that you have a backup saved in a local file on your computer or USB? I highly recommend backups. Backup your backups even. I tend to feel more comfortable saving stuff on a USB, and this is very much a personal preference. Just because if, God forbid, like there's a major computer crash of some kind, if all of your work is saved on a desktop, then that can be a really, really stressful, really bad situation. So I tend to say have it saved on a USB, especially since too, that doesn't take up space on your computer. It's taking up space on an external drive. And you can have a USB that's dedicated just to this if you want to. Yeah, Sarah has made a good point in the chat that she saves important things in the cloud and in external hard drives, several different places. I highly recommend that too. You should all have access to OneDrive, which is essentially the cloud service for the Microsoft suite. And so you can save things in OneDrive, you can save it to a USB as well, and then you have it in multiple places. Yeah, OneDrive, the cloud, they kind of function the same way. All right. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anything else. Again, I will say, just as a way of kind of wrapping things up, if you guys think of questions, you know, as you kind of go away and think about what we talked about tonight, you are always welcome to reach out to me. It may take me a couple of days to get back to you, but I promise I will get back to you and answer your questions. And as someone asked much earlier on in the chat, you are always welcome to also set up an appointment with me to come in or to talk over Zoom or the phone. If you have specific questions that maybe might be more complex or take a little more time.
Well, I just want to say if no one has any other questions, I would just like to say thank you so much to Laura Thorpe for being able to come to this event. I always find something new, and I'm very excited to get started on my portfolio and put it on my LinkedIn and, you know, have everyone see the work I've done throughout the program.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and thank you for coming. And I really enjoyed doing this for you guys. I hope that it helps people. So yeah, I hope everyone has a good night.
You too. Hopefully you get some rest.
Yes. So, all right, everyone have a really good night.
Yes. Good night.
Good night, everyone.